She didn't say a word when she walked out. No tears. No trembling lip. No dramatic pause at the door. Amara Brooks simply set a single white envelope on the edge of his desk, smoothed the front of her blazer with both hands, and walked away from 6 years of her life like she was leaving a grocery store. It was the calmness that broke him. Jae-won Shin, the most feared man in 3 countries, founder of a technology empire worth $40 billion, a man who had sat across negotiating tables with heads of state and never blinked, stood frozen behind his floor-to-ceiling window watching a plus-sized black woman in a burgundy blazer step into an elevator and disappear. He didn't move for 4 full minutes. His executive assistant of 6 years. Gone. Just like that. And the most terrifying part? She looked relieved. Now pause right there. Before we go any further into this story, I have to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Seriously, drop your location in the comments below, because these stories have been reaching people from Lagos to London, from Seoul to Sao Paulo, and we genuinely want to know how far this one travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what is about to unfold in the next few minutes is the kind of story you will want to watch twice. Now, let's get back to Amara. The envelope contained exactly 114 words. Jae-won counted them. He didn't know why he counted them. Maybe because it felt wrong that 6 years could be summarized in 114 words. Maybe because he was looking for something hidden between the lines, some clue, some reason, some thread he could pull that would make sense of what just happened. There was nothing. Effective immediately was the phrase that kept snagging his attention. Not 2 weeks' notice. Not a transition plan. Effective immediately. As though staying one more day was something she simply could not afford to do. He set the letter down. Picked it up. Set it down again. His chief of staff, a sharp Korean woman named Soo-yeon Park, knocked twice and entered without waiting. She took one look at the letter on his desk and at the expression on Jae-won's face and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. "She's really gone?" Soo-yeon finally said. "She's really gone." Soo-yeon exhaled slowly through her nose. "Did she say why?" "No." "Did you ask?" Jae-won looked at her. "She didn't give me the chance." Soo-yeon crossed her arms and looked out the same window he had been staring through. Down below, the streets of Seoul moved the way they always did, fast and indifferent. "She'll reconsider," Soo-yeon said, though her voice didn't carry much conviction. "Give her the weekend." But Jae-won had seen Amara's face when she set that envelope down. He had known her long enough to read the subtleties, the way her jaw sat when she had already made a decision and was simply carrying out its execution. There was no uncertainty in her eyes. There was something else entirely. Something that looked painfully close to grief. Not grief about leaving. Grief about something she had already lost long before she walked out the door. He just didn't know what. 3 floors below, Amara sat in the back of a cab heading toward Incheon Airport, her carry-on between her feet and her phone face down on the seat beside her. She didn't look out the window. She stared at her hands, the same hands that had organized his schedule, protected his reputation, translated his moods for rooms full of people who were afraid of him, and quietly dismantled no fewer than 11 separate crises that would have cost him everything if they had ever reached the surface. 11 crises. 6 years. 1 letter. 114 words. She had counted them too. She pressed her fingers together in her lap and told herself she was not going to cry in this cab. She had given herself the walk from his office to the elevator for emotions. The elevator ride down for composure. The lobby for performance. She was past all 3 checkpoints now. She was not going to cry. She cried anyway. Not loudly. Just a single stubborn tear that slid down the side of her nose and dropped onto the back of her hand before she could stop it. She wiped it away with her thumb and looked out the window finally, watching Seoul scroll past her like the closing credits of a film she had been living inside for 6 years. She thought about the first day she arrived. 24 years old. Fresh graduate. Absolutely terrified. She had walked into the Shin Group headquarters in a blazer she'd bought 2 sizes. Too small because the store didn't carry her size, and she had refused to show up to that interview in anything less than sharp. She had spent 45 minutes in the bathroom beforehand, tucking and adjusting and telling herself that the way she looked had nothing to do with what she could do. Jae-won had hired her in 12 minutes. Not because of how she looked. Not in spite of it. He hadn't seemed to notice at all, which was its own kind of relief. He had looked at her resume, asked her 4 questions, each one sharper than the last, watched the way she answered without breaking eye contact, and said, "When can you start?" She had started the following Monday. 6 years later, she was in the back of a cab heading to the airport, and the man she had quietly loved for most of those 6 years still didn't know her name was tattooed on the first chapter of a story he had never bothered to read. Back at the office, Jae-won did something he almost never did. He cancelled his afternoon. 3 meetings. 1 conference call. A dinner with a European investor who had flown in specifically to see him. All of it gone with a single message to Soo-yeon, who stared at her phone after receiving it like she was reading a message from a different person entirely. He sat in his office until the building began to empty. Then he walked to Amara's desk. It was already clean. That was the thing that got him. In 6 years, her desk had always carried a particular organized energy, stacked files color-coded by urgency, 2 monitors angled precisely, a small succulent plant in a terracotta pot she had named Gerald, a framed quote on the corner that he had never been close enough to read clearly. Gerald was gone. The quote was gone. The monitors were still there because they belonged to the company. But everything that had been Amara, everything that made that corner of the office feel like a specific human being sat there rather than just an employee, was gone. He stood there for a long time. Then he opened her top drawer. He didn't know what he was looking for. He told himself he was checking for anything company-related she might have left behind. But what he found instead was a single item she had apparently forgotten, or perhaps left on purpose. A small card. The kind that comes attached to a flower delivery. He turned it over. On the back, in handwriting he didn't recognize, were 4 words. "You deserved better. Always." He stood very still. He didn't know who had sent her flowers. He didn't know when. He didn't know what the flowers were for. But he stood holding that small card in the empty office for longer than he would ever admit to anyone, and for the first time since she had walked out, the tightness in his chest shifted from confusion into something he had no clean word for. The weeks that followed were, to put it generously, a disaster. Not a visible disaster. From the outside, Shin Group continued to operate at its usual formidable pace. Earnings reports were strong. The new infrastructure deal with the European consortium moved forward. Jae-won appeared at the right events, said the right things, wore the right suits. But internally, quietly, systematically, things began to come apart at the seams. It started small. A meeting that wasn't on the calendar when it should have been. A contact who didn't receive a follow-up call at the right moment and moved their partnership discussion to a competitor. A legal document that missed a filing deadline by 18 hours, because nobody had flagged the cutoff date. Soo-yeon hired a replacement within the first week. A young woman named Chaerin, highly qualified, meticulous, who came with excellent references and a genuine eagerness to prove herself. Chaerin lasted 22 days before submitting her own resignation, citing an unsustainable work environment. The second replacement lasted 11 days. The third, a seasoned executive assistant who had previously worked for the Deputy Prime Minister's office, lasted exactly 1 month before requesting a transfer to a different department. Jae-won's cousin, Daniel Shin, flew in from Hong Kong at that point, ostensibly for a board meeting, but everyone in the family understood that Daniel went where things needed to be fixed. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, walked the floor, sat in 3 back-to-back meetings with Jae-won, and by Tuesday evening was sitting across from him at a private restaurant table with a glass of whiskey and the expression of someone who was about to say something nobody wanted to hear. "You know what your problem is," Daniel said. "I'm sure you're going to tell me." "Your problem," Daniel said, swirling his glass, "is that you built your entire operational infrastructure around one person without realizing it, and now that person is gone, and you're discovering that what you thought was a team is actually just a collection of people who are all depending on her to connect the dots between them." Jae-won said nothing. "She wasn't just your assistant, Young," Daniel continued, using the Korean term with a weight that made it land differently than usual. "She was the connective tissue of this entire operation. She knew everyone's role, everyone's temperament, every unwritten rule, every ongoing crisis, every relationship that needed maintenance. She was holding this place together with both hands, and you were so used to things running smoothly that you thought it was the system working. It was the system working. It was Amara working," Daniel said. "There's a difference." The silence that followed was long and specific. "Have you tried calling her?" Daniel asked. "She's in Chicago." That wasn't the question. Jae-won picked up his glass. "Set it down without drinking." "She didn't leave a door open, Daniel. She left 114 words and a clean desk. That's not someone who wants a phone call." Daniel studied him for a moment. "No," he said slowly. "That's someone who wanted you to notice long before it came to that." In Chicago, Amara had settled into a rhythm she was still learning how to trust. She was staying with her mother, Diane Brooks, in the house she had grown up in, a warm, slightly crowded brownstone in Hyde Park where the kitchen always smelled like something was either being cooked or had recently been cooked, and where her mother had an opinion about everything and delivered each one with absolute love and zero apology. "You look skinny," her mother said the morning after she arrived, which was the Brooks family's way of saying you look like you haven't been taking care of yourself. "Mama, I'm not skinny." "Skinny in the face," her mother clarified, touching Amara's cheek with one warm hand. "You've been carrying something heavy. I can see it right here." She tapped gently beneath Amara's left eye. "Whatever it is, you can set it down now. You're home." Amara had held it together through the flight, through the cab ride from O'Hare, through the front door and the smell of her mother's cooking and the familiar sound of the television in the next room. She had held it together through all of it. She didn't hold it together through that. She sat at her mother's kitchen table and cried properly for the first time since she'd left Seoul. Not the single cab tear, not the private elevator grief, but the full, unguarded kind that comes when you are finally somewhere safe enough to fall apart. Her mother said nothing. She simply sat beside her, rubbed slow circles on her back, and let her go. When it was over, Amara wiped her face with a dish towel and said, "I'm okay." "I know you are," her mother said. "You've always been okay eventually. That's never been your problem." Amara looked at her. "What's my problem?" Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You give people everything except the one thing they actually need to understand you. You give them your effort, your loyalty, your intelligence, your time. But you never show them where you hurt. So they never know what they're risking until it's already gone." Amara stared at the table. "He didn't see me, Mama." "Baby," her mother said gently, "did you ever let him?" That question sat in Amara's chest for a long time after the kitchen went quiet. She had been back in Chicago for 3 weeks when her older brother Marcus showed up on a Saturday morning with coffee, no warning, and the energy of someone who had been wanting to have a conversation and had finally run out of patience waiting to be invited. Marcus Brooks was 41, an architect with their father's stubborn chin and their mother's inability to let anything go unspoken. He sat across from Amara at the kitchen table, their mother conveniently absent, running errands she had apparently decided were urgent that specific morning, and pushed a coffee cup toward his sister. "How are you actually doing?" he said. "I'm good, Amara." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "I'm getting there." Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't push. That was the thing about Marcus. He knew how to wait. He had learned it from watching their father, who had been a quiet man in a house full of loud feelings, and who had understood that sometimes people needed the space to come to the thing rather than being dragged toward it. "Do you want to talk about him?" Marcus said finally. "There's nothing to talk about." "Then why do you check your phone every 12 minutes? Amara opened her mouth. Closed it. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I'm not," she stuttered. "You've checked it 4 times since I sat down," he said. "I counted. You look at it, you look away, you put it face down. Then about 12 minutes later, same thing." He paused. "Who are you waiting to hear from?" "Nobody." Marcus looked at her for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "You loved him." It wasn't a question. Amara looked at her coffee. "For how long?" he said. She exhaled slowly. "A while." "How long is a while?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know that speech he gave at the Global Youth Entrepreneurship Summit? The one that got shared everywhere about 8 years ago?" Marcus frowned. Jae-won Shin. "That was before you worked for him." "Yes," Amara said. "I was 22. I was in a bad place, Marcus. Really bad. You remember that year." He remembered. He didn't say so, but the shift in his face said it for him. I watched that speech on a laptop in a library because I couldn't afford to go home that semester and I didn't want to worry Mama, Amara continued. And something he said, I don't even know if I can explain it, something he said made me feel like the future was still mine to build. Like I hadn't already used up all my chances. She paused. I applied to every position at Shin Group after I graduated. Not because of the salary. Not because of the prestige. Because I wanted to work for someone who had once, without knowing it, talked me back from the edge of giving up. Marcus was very still. He never knew, Amara said. He doesn't know. And I was never going to tell him, because what would I even say? By the way, your TEDx talk is the reason I'm still here. She shook her head. You don't tell someone that. You show up. You do the work. You try to be worthy of the thing they accidentally gave you. She looked out the kitchen window at the gray Chicago morning. And then 6 years pass, she said quietly. And you realize you've been so busy being worthy of the inspiration that you forgot to live the actual life. The kitchen was very quiet. Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his. He didn't say anything. Sometimes the Brooks family communicated entirely in silences, and this was one of those times. A silence that said, I see you, I'm here, and none of this means what you're afraid it means about you. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Daniel Shin had started pulling threads. It began because he was meticulous by nature. Daniel had spent 15 years in corporate law before moving to private investment, and he had a lawyer's instinct for the thing that didn't quite add up. What didn't quite add up here was the pattern Jae-won's company had been experiencing since Amara left. The gaps were too specific, too targeted, too consistent in their timing to be simple operational disorganization. Daniel requested access to the internal communications archive, a normal request, given his position on the family board. He brought in a quiet analyst named Yuna, whom he trusted completely, and gave her a single instruction. Map every internal crisis or operational anomaly from the past 6 years and cross-reference the resolution timeline with staff activity logs. Yuna came back to him 8 days later with a report that made him sit down and read it twice before saying a single word. How confident are you in this? He asked her. Very, she said. He read it a third time. What Yuna's analysis showed was this. Over the course of 6 years, Shin Group had faced no fewer than 14 separate incidents that, had they been allowed to escalate to boardroom or public level, would have caused significant damage, reputational, financial, or both. Competitor intelligence leaks. A vendor embezzlement scheme caught 3 days before it would have surfaced externally. An attempted defamation campaign traced to a former partner. 2 blackmail attempts targeting board members. A regulatory loophole that would have triggered a government audit. In every single case, the resolution had been initiated before Jae-won or senior leadership were ever briefed. In 11 of the 14 cases, the only staff member whose access logs, communication records, and calendar showed direct contact with the relevant parties during the resolution window was Amara Brooks. She had never filed a report, never claimed credit, never escalated to leadership. She had simply, quietly, systematically, invisibly, made problems disappear. She wasn't just protecting the company, Yuna said, when Daniel had finished reading. She was protecting him. Specifically. Look at the pattern. Every incident either directly threatened his personal reputation or had the potential to destabilize something he cared about deeply. The financial ones, the PR ones, even the personal ones. The personal ones, Daniel said sharply. Yuna turned to a specific page. 3 years ago. There was a leak attempt involving private medical information about Director Shin's mother. It never reached the press. The journalist who had been contacted withdrew the story without explanation 2 days after it was pitched. Daniel looked at the page. Amara was in contact with that journalist's editor the same week, Yuna said quietly. The room was very still. And this one, Yuna continued, turning to another section. 14 months ago. Someone inside the company was building a case against Director Shin for a regulatory complaint that would have been filed anonymously. The case was substantial enough to trigger a formal investigation. I never heard about any investigation. Because it never happened, Yuna said. The person building the case suddenly withdrew it. Left the company voluntarily 6 weeks later. She looked up. Amara processed their exit paperwork personally, which was unusual. that's typically handled by HR. But she requested to do it herself. Nobody questioned it. Daniel sat back in his chair. "There's one more," Yuna said, and something in her voice made him pay closer attention. This one she didn't stop. She placed a single document in front of him. He read it slowly. Then he looked up. "This is still active." "It was still active when she resigned," Yuna said. "Which means she either ran out of time to handle it, or she left because of it," Daniel finished. He stared at the document. The name at the center of it was someone Jae-won had trusted for over a decade. Someone who attended family dinners. Someone who had given a speech at Jae-won's father's funeral. Victor Lim. Senior board member. Family confidant. The man who had been one of the first to express sympathy when Amara resigned, saying it was a great loss and that she would be difficult to replace. "How deep does it go?" Daniel asked. "Deep enough," Yuna said. "He's been rerouting a portion of the infrastructure deal revenue for 2 years. Small enough percentages to avoid automated detection. But over time," she indicated a number on the page, "it adds up to this." Daniel looked at the number. He picked up his phone. Jae-won received the call at 11:30 on a Wednesday night. He was still in the office. He had been staying late more often than he used to, though he would not have admitted the reason was that going home felt louder than it used to, in a way he couldn't explain. Home had always been quiet. But now the quiet had a different texture to it. He answered on the second ring. Daniel didn't bother with preamble. "I need you to listen to everything I'm about to say before you respond. Do you understand?" "Daniel." "Before you respond," Daniel repeated. Jae-won exhaled. "Fine." Daniel told him. "All of it. The 14 incidents. The resolutions. The journalist. The regulatory case. Victor Lim. The number." The line was silent for a long time when he finished. "She knew about Victor," Jae-won said finally. His voice was very quiet. It had gone to that specific register it reached when he was controlling something enormous by will alone. "That's our working theory," Daniel said. "The timing of her resignation lines up with when she would have uncovered enough to understand the scope. She either didn't know how to bring it to you without evidence strong enough to stand up. Or she was afraid," Jae-won said. "Yes. Of Victor. He has relationships with people in multiple government offices, Jae-won. If she came forward prematurely and he found out, if he had any reason to believe she was a threat to him," Daniel paused. "She was protecting herself. And by leaving, she was removing herself as a target." The silence this time was different. It had weight in it. The kind of weight that comes when understanding arrives too late to prevent the damage, but too early to fully absorb what the damage actually cost. 6 years, Jae-won said. "Yes. She spent 6 years protecting me. Without telling me. Without asking for anything." Daniel didn't answer because there was nothing to add. "And I let her leave," Jae-won said. The words were quiet and flat, and they cost him something to say. "I stood at that window and I watched her walk into an elevator, and I let her go, because I thought she was looking for a new challenge." "You didn't know." "That's not—" He stopped. Started again. "That's not enough, Daniel. Not knowing isn't the same as being innocent. I should have known. She was right in front of me for 6 years. I knew how she took her coffee. I knew which meetings made her tense. I knew when she was masking a headache because she got a specific line between her eyebrows and she pressed 2 fingers against her left temple when she thought nobody was watching." He paused. "I knew all of that, and I still never stopped to ask what she needed. What she wanted. What she was carrying." His voice was tight now. "I treated the most important person in my professional life like a very reliable piece of infrastructure." Jae-won. "Don't," he said. "Don't make it easier than it is." Daniel was quiet. "Where is she?" Jae-won asked. "Chicago. Her family is there. I know her family is there." A pause. "Is she all right?" "I don't know," Daniel said honestly. "But I know she deleted a folder from her private drive before she left. Our IT team found traces of the directory name in the system logs." "What was it called?" "Emergency Protocol." Jae-won was silent for a moment. Then he said, "She had a contingency plan. For if something happened to me." "Didn't she?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "She had 17 contingency plans. For 17 different scenarios. All of them centered on protecting you or the company if a threat ever escalated beyond what she could manage alone." The line was very quiet for a long time. When Jae-won spoke again, his voice had shifted into something Daniel had heard from him exactly once before, the night their grandmother died. It was the voice of a man who was standing at the edge of something that could not be undone, deciding whether to look at it directly or look away. He chose to look directly. "Get me everything you have on Victor," he said. "I want it locked and documented and legally sound before we move. And Daniel," a pause, "keep it quiet. Nobody touches Amara's name in any of this. Whatever she did to protect me. I will not let that be the thing that puts her in the center of an investigation." "Understood." "One more thing," Jae-won said. "What?" "Book me a flight to Chicago." The silence on Daniel's end stretched for exactly 3 seconds. Then, "When?" "Friday." The flight from Seoul to Chicago was 11 hours and 40 minutes. Jae-won spent the first 2 hours reviewing everything Daniel had sent him. The full report, Yuna's analysis, the documentation on Victor Lim that was already being quietly assembled by a legal team operating under strict confidentiality. He read every page twice. He looked at the timelines. He cross-referenced dates. He sat with the weight of what 14 invisible rescues looked like when they were laid out in a document and given proper names and proper numbers and proper context. Then he closed the folder and spent the remaining 9 hours and 40 minutes doing something he almost never did on flights. He thought. Not strategically. Not analytically. Not with the part of his mind that was always 3 moves ahead and calculating margins and assessing risk. He thought the way people think when something has cracked open inside them and the light is getting in whether they want it to or not. He thought about the first day Amara walked into his office. The blazer that was slightly too small and the way she had worn it like it fit perfectly because she had decided it did. He thought about the way she answered his 4 questions. Directly, without performance, without the rehearsed quality most candidates carried into interview rooms like a costume. She had just answered. Like the truth was the easiest thing she owned. He thought about the small succulent plant she named Gerald and the way she talked to it under her breath when she thought the office was empty. He thought about the quote on the corner of her desk that he had never been close enough to read. He thought about the card he'd found in her drawer, "You deserved better." Always, and realized with a slowness that felt almost physical that he still didn't know who sent it. But he knew now, with a certainty that sat in his stomach like something swallowed whole, that whoever sent it was right. She had deserved better. Not because she was exceptional at her job, though she was, in ways that 14 documented crises now made impossible to argue with. Not because she had spent 6 years quietly holding his world together with both hands while he mistook the smoothness for the natural state of things. She deserved better because she was a person. A full, specific, irreplaceable human being who had walked into his life at 24 years old and given it everything she had, and he had received every bit of it without ever once turning toward her and saying, "I see you. Not just what you do. You." He pressed his fingers against the cold window of the plane and watched the dark ocean 30,000 feet below and felt, for the first time in a long time, something that was not ambition or strategy or the controlled forward momentum that had defined him since he was 19 years old and decided he would build something the world couldn't ignore. He felt ashamed. And beneath the shame, quieter and more dangerous and more honest than anything he had allowed himself in years, he felt something else entirely. Something he had been filing under professional regard and operational dependency and personal respect, using every clean, managed, boardroom-appropriate word he could find to avoid using the one word that actually fit. He pressed his forehead briefly against the cold glass. He had a lot of ground to cover in Chicago. Amara did not know he was coming. She found out the way she found out most unexpected things, through her brother, who had no gift for suspense and even less for keeping information to himself when he felt strongly that someone needed to have it. Marcus called her on a Thursday evening while she was at the kitchen table working on a consulting proposal for an international cultural organization that had reached out to her 3 weeks after she returned home. She had been surprised by how quickly the work had come, Apparently her reputation existed outside of Shin Group in ways she hadn't fully tracked while she was inside it. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, without hello, "and I need you to not make any decisions or go anywhere until I finish." Amara set down her pen. "Marcus. He's coming here." The kitchen went very quiet. "What?" she said. "Jae-won Shin. He lands tomorrow morning. Chicago. I got a call from his cousin Daniel about 40 minutes ago. Apparently Daniel has been doing some kind of internal investigation and found something that—" He paused. "Amara, how much do you actually know about what's been happening at Shin Group since you left?" She was very still. "Why?" "Because Daniel Shin seems to think you know quite a bit," Marcus said carefully. "And he wanted me to tell you, before his cousin shows up on whatever doorstep he's planning to show up on, that whatever you did, whatever you were protecting, they know now. They have it documented. And Jae-won," Marcus paused again, and when he continued his voice had lost some of its usual confident older brother architecture and replaced it with something more careful. "Daniel said his cousin has not slept since Wednesday night. He said he's been reading the same files for 2 days." Amara stared at the table. "He's coming to find you," Marcus said. "Not to ask you to come back to work. I want to be clear about that, because Daniel was clear about it." He said. She could hear Marcus looking at something, presumably his phone. He said, "Tell her he's not coming as her employer. He doesn't have that right anymore. He's coming as himself. Whatever that means to her is her decision." The kitchen was completely silent. Her mother appeared in the doorway from the hallway, took one look at Amara's face, and quietly turned around and went back the way she came. "Amara," Marcus said. "I heard you. What do you want to do?" She looked at her hands on the table. The same hands. The same table where she had cried 3 weeks ago, and her mother had rubbed circles on her back and told her she could set it down now. She was home. "Nothing," she said finally. "I'm not going to do anything. If he's coming, he knows where to find me." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you scared?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. And then, more quietly, "That's almost the scariest part." He arrived at the brownstone in Hyde Park at 10:40 on a Friday morning. He had not called ahead. He had the address from Daniel, who had gotten it from the kind of quiet research that Jae-won didn't ask too many questions about. He stood on the front step of a warm-looking brownstone with a small clay pot of winter herbs beside the door and a welcome mat that said "Home is where the love is" in faded letters, and he stood there for a long moment before he knocked. Diane Brooks answered the door. She was a compact woman in her early 60s with Amara's eyes and the expression of someone who had been expecting him, had formed opinions about him long before his arrival, and had decided to be civil about it in a way that made the civility itself feel like a verdict. "Mrs. Brooks," he said. "I know who you are," she said. She looked at him for a moment, a full, unhurried assessment that reminded him, with a sharp and unexpected pain, of her daughter. "She's in the backyard," she said. She stepped aside to let him in. Then, as he crossed the threshold, she added, without looking at him, "She forgives easily. That's not a weakness. Don't mistake it for one." He stopped, turned slightly. "I won't," he said. Diane looked at him then, directly, the way Amara had looked at him in that interview room 11 years ago and again in that London corridor 6 months after she left. "See that you don't," she said simply, and walked back toward the kitchen. Amara was sitting on a wooden bench at the far end of a small backyard that was mostly dormant with late winter, but had a stubborn rosebush along the back fence that was putting out a few determined blooms despite the cold. She had a coffee mug in both hands, and she was looking at the rosebush when she heard the back door open. She didn't turn around. She heard his footsteps on the wooden deck. She heard them slow as they reached the grass. She heard him stop a few feet away from her bench, and then there was silence, and the silence was the kind that had 6 years and 14 invisible rescues and 114 words and a small forgotten card and an 11-hour flight inside it. "You named the succulent Gerald," he said finally. She blinked. Of everything she had imagined him saying, it was not that. "I did," she said. "I never asked you why." "You never asked," she agreed. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. He came around the bench slowly and sat beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could see him properly for the first time since London. He looked like he hadn't slept. His jaw had 2 days of growth on it, and his eyes carried the specific exhaustion of someone who has been awake not because of work but because of thought, which is the more tiring of the two. He looked, she realized with a small and inconvenient shock, like a man who had been through something. "Why, Gerald," he said. She looked at the rose bush. "My father's name was Gerald," she said. "He died when I was 16. He used to say that anything worth keeping needed regular attention and a little bit of sunlight and someone willing to believe it would grow even when it didn't look like it was growing." She paused. "I thought it was a good name for a plant." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know your father passed away." "You didn't ask." The words weren't sharp. They weren't an accusation. They were just true, and they sat between them in the cold backyard air with the weight of all the questions he hadn't asked over 6 years, and she had the grace not to press on them. He turned to look at her. She kept looking at the rose bush. "Daniel showed me the report," he said. She said nothing. "All of it," he continued. "The 14 incidents. The journalist. The regulatory case. Victor." A pause. "The emergency protocol folder." Her hands tightened slightly around the mug. "How much did he find?" "Enough," Jae-won said. "Enough to understand what you were doing. What you had been doing. 4 years." He paused. "Why didn't you tell me?" She was quiet for a long moment. A bird landed on the fence near the rosebush, looked at them both, and left. "Which part?" she said finally. "Any of it. All of it. The threats. Victor. Any single one of the 14 times you stepped between something and me without." He stopped. Restarted. "You should have told me, Amara." "Maybe," she said. "But you have to understand something." She turned to look at him then, for the first time since he sat down. Her eyes were clear. There was no anger in them, which somehow made this harder than anger would have. When you're the person in the room that people underestimate, you develop a very specific skill set. You learn to solve problems before they become visible, because the moment a problem becomes visible, people start looking for who failed to prevent it. And if you're already the person people are most likely to question, she paused, you don't get to fail publicly. You can only succeed quietly. He looked at her for a long time. "Is that how you felt? In my company? Like someone who had to earn the right to exist in the room?" She held his gaze. "Some rooms, yes. My room." She was quiet. "Your room was different," she said finally. "You never made me feel small. That's not what this is about." She looked back at the rosebush. "But you also never made me feel seen. There's a lot of space between those two things, and I lived in that space for 6 years." The words landed exactly where they were aimed. He didn't look away from her profile. The morning light was doing something to the angles of her face that he found he couldn't stop looking at. He had always known, in the abstract, carefully unexamined way that he knew things he wasn't ready to do anything about, that Amara Brooks was beautiful. It was not an absence of knowledge. It was an absence of permission he had never given himself because she worked for him, and because she was essential, and because the calculus of losing her professionally had always, somehow, been the thing that stopped him from examining what it would mean to need her differently. He understood now, too late and too clearly, that the calculus had been wrong from the beginning. He had been so afraid of losing what she did that he had never stopped to protect what she was. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to let me finish before you respond." She looked at him. 8 years ago," he said, "I gave a speech at a conference in London. It was early in my career. I was 31 years old and terrified in a way I didn't let anyone see, and I said whatever I actually believed because I was too tired that day to say anything performative." He paused. "I never knew if it reached anyone. You give speeches and you go home and you hope the words landed somewhere useful, but you never really know." He looked at her steadily. "I know now." Amara went very still. "Marcus called Daniel last night," Jae-won said quietly. "He said his sister deserved to be walked toward, not waited out. He also may have told Daniel the reason you applied to Shin Group in the first place." He paused. "Daniel told me." The backyard was completely silent. Amara's eyes were bright now, not spilling, but close, the way eyes get when they are holding more than they were designed to hold in one moment.
"I didn't want you to know that," she said. Her voice was the quietest it had been since he arrived. "I know. I wasn't trying to," she stopped, pressed her lips together. Tried again. "I didn't come to work for you because I thought I owed you something. I came because you made me believe that the life I wanted was still possible. And I wanted to build something alongside someone who understood that building things was serious work." She paused. It wasn't about the speech. It became about you. About who you actually were, up close, when the cameras weren't there. About the way you treated the cleaning staff the same way you treated the board members. About the way you stayed late on your own mother's birthday because a junior employee had made a costly mistake and you didn't want anyone else to absorb the consequences. Her voice wavered slightly. You were worth protecting. That was never a calculation. It was just obvious. He reached over and covered her hand with his. She looked down at his hand on hers. She didn't pull away. But she also didn't look up at him yet, and he gave her the moment, because he was learning, late, expensively, in a cold Chicago backyard with a stubborn rosebush and a welcome mat that said something about love, how to give her what she actually needed instead of what was convenient. "Every inch of you is perfect," he said. She looked up at him then. "Not because you managed my calendar, or because you stopped 14 disasters, or because you are the most competent person I have ever had the privilege of knowing," he said. "Because you are Amara. Because you carry your father's name on a succulent plant, and you cry in cabs so nobody has to worry about you, and you walk into rooms in blazers that don't quite fit and wear them like they were made for you." His voice was steady, but it was costing him. "Because you spent 6 years giving me everything and never once made me feel guilty for taking it, and that kind of grace is not something you find twice." He paused. "I don't want to find it twice. I don't want anyone else. I want the person who decided I was worth protecting before she even knew me. I want to spend whatever time you'll give me proving that she was right." The tear she had been holding finally moved. She let it. She didn't wipe it away this time. He reached up with his other hand and, very gently, brushed it from her cheekbone with his thumb. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. The kind of second that contains a decision. When she opened them, she looked at him the way she had never allowed herself to look at him in 6 years, directly, fully, without the professional layer, without the careful management, without the distance she had kept like a piece of protective equipment. "You have a lot of ground to cover," she said quietly. "I know. I'm not coming back to Shin Group. I'm not asking you to. I have a life here. A consulting practice. My family. I know that too." She studied him. "Then what exactly are you asking?" He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking if you'll let me be in whatever life you're building. Not as your employer. Not as the person you protect. As someone who shows up." He paused. "Regularly. With intention. And probably a replacement for Gerald, because I looked everywhere in my apartment and I cannot find where you put him, and I think you took him with you." Something shifted in her face then, something that had been held tightly for a very long time, and she laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere genuine and catches you off guard and sounds exactly like relief. He watched her laugh and felt something settle in his chest that had not been settled in months. "I took Gerald," she admitted. "I know you took Gerald. He was mine. He absolutely was." She looked at him for a long moment. The laughter faded into something softer, and in the quiet that followed, in the cold backyard in Hyde Park with the rosebush blooming against all reasonable expectation, Amara Brooks made the second most significant decision she had ever made in her life. The first had been applying to Shin Group 8 years ago. She turned her hand over beneath his and laced her fingers through his fingers. "Regular attention," she said quietly. "A little sunlight. Someone willing to believe it'll grow even when it doesn't look like it's growing." She looked at him. "Those are the terms." "Those are the terms," he agreed. And for the first time in 6 years, Jae-won Shin sat still without wanting to be somewhere else. Victor Lim was arrested on a Tuesday morning 4 weeks later. The charges were extensive: financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of corporate funds, and 2 counts related to the intimidation of a witness whose identity was sealed by court order and whose name would not appear in any public filing. Daniel had made sure of that.
A team of 3 lawyers had spent the better part of a month making sure of exactly that. The news broke quietly at first, a financial publication, then 2 more, then a cascade. By Wednesday evening it was the lead story on 3 major business networks. By Thursday morning, Jae-won's inbox contained 412 messages, which Soo-yeon filtered with the efficiency of someone who had finally, 3 replacements later, accepted that she was also doing Amara's job and restructured her entire schedule accordingly. Jae-won read 12 of the 412 messages. The only one that mattered arrived at 11:17 on Thursday morning, from an address he didn't recognize, a new email, created recently, the kind of address you make when you want to say something privately. It contained 4 words. Thank you. Stay safe. He saved it in a folder he labeled with her initials. Then he called her, because he had her number now and permission to use it, which was a thing he was still getting used to in the way you get used to a light being on in a room that used to always be dark, gratefully, and with the awareness that you wasted a lot of time in the dark. She answered on the second ring. I got your email, he said. I didn't send an email, she said. AB 1998 at a domain I've never seen before. A pause. That could be anyone. It could be, he agreed. Are you watching the news? I'm consulting on a project in Geneva, she said. I'm a little busy. Geneva? Yes. When did you go to Geneva? Monday. I told you Monday. You told me you had a trip. I said Geneva. You said Europe, he said. Geneva is in Europe. He exhaled. Amara. Jae-won. There was a pause, and in it was the particular warmth of 2 people who have recently discovered that bickering with someone you care about is its own form of intimacy, the kind that means you're comfortable enough to be difficult. Are you all right? He asked. His voice dropped slightly on it. She was quiet for a moment. I'm good, she said. And then, in a smaller voice that he had learned to recognize as the one she used when she was telling the truth all the way down, I'm really good. Good, he said. Come home soon. Another pause. And then, soft, careful, and carrying the specific weight of a word she was still learning to use in a new context. Soon. She hung up. He sat with his phone in his hand for a moment. Then he set it down and looked out the window at Seoul moving past in its usual fast and indifferent way, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel indifferent. It felt like something that was waiting, patiently, for whatever came next. What came next, nobody fully knew yet. That was the part nobody told you about the moment after the crisis resolves, and the truth surfaces, and the right words finally get said in a cold backyard in Chicago, the after. The part where 2 people who found each other in the wreckage of a 6-year misunderstanding have to figure out what they actually are when the emergency is over and the drama has settled and there is no crisis to manage or distance to protect or folder marked emergency protocol to quietly maintain. What they were, it turned out, was complicated. Amara was building something of her own now, a consulting practice that was growing faster than she'd planned, work that took her to Geneva and Lagos and Nairobi and 3 other cities before the spring arrived. She was not going to stop. She was not going to fold herself back into someone else's story, no matter how much she cared about the person writing it. She had spent 6 years doing that. The next chapter was hers. Jae-won understood this. He said he understood it. Most days he actually did. Some days he found himself standing at the window of his office at 11 in the evening, Seoul spread out below him, and reaching for his phone to call her, and stopping himself, because she was in a different time zone and in the middle of something important and he had promised. Regular attention, a little sunlight, someone willing to believe it'll grow, and he was trying, in the effortful, imperfect, genuinely trying way of a man who is learning a thing he should have learned years ago. She sent him a photo from Nairobi. A market, bright colors, morning light, her own shadow in the corner of the frame stretching long across the ground. No caption. She knew he would understand it the way she had always understood his silences, as a whole sentence delivered without words. He saved it next to the 4-word email. He bought a succulent. He did not name it Gerald. That felt presumptuous, like claiming something that wasn't his to claim. He put it on his desk in the corner where her monitors used to be, and he watered it twice a week, and he did not talk to it because that was her thing and he was not going to pretend to be her. But he kept it alive, which was its own kind of statement, and Soo-yeon noticed it one morning and said nothing, which was her own kind of acknowledgement. Things were not resolved. Things were not simple. There was a woman in Geneva or Nairobi or Lagos or Chicago building her own world, and there was a man in Seoul learning to be someone worth walking toward, and between them was a distance that was partly geographic and partly the particular kind of distance that lives between two people who have been through something real together and are still figuring out what it means. But here is what was also true, and what mattered more than the complicated parts. She answered when he called. He called. And somewhere in a Hyde Park brownstone, on a kitchen windowsill that got the best morning light in the house, a small succulent in a terracotta pot named Gerald was growing slowly, steadily, in the particular determined way of things that have been properly tended to, putting out new leaves in the pale winter sun, unbothered by the cold, unhurried by expectation, simply and quietly becoming more of what it already was. That was enough for now. That was, in fact, everything. And that right there, that is why these stories get to me every single time. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, I want you to know that genuinely means something. There are 1,000 things you could have been doing, and you chose to stay until the last word, and I do not take that lightly. If this story moved you, if any part of it hit differently, if Amara reminded you of someone, if Jae-won's airport moment made you feel something you weren't expecting, please hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment from this story. I read every single one, and your comments are honestly what keep these stories coming. Also, and I ask this every time because the answers never stop surprising me, what city are you watching from? We have viewers from places that genuinely take my breath away, and I would love to add your city to that list. Until the next story finds you, take care of yourself, stay safe out there, and remember, the right people always find their way back. Always.